Welcome to Nobilis Erotica episode 295. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. If you don't want to hear sexy things, then this is definitely not the podcast for you. This week we have an excerpt from Learning the Ropes, a debut erotic novel by J.J. Rose. In addition to writing erotica, J.J. also writes, under a different name, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. When not writing, he enjoys reading, cooking, spanking, and watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Learning the Ropes and its forthcoming sequel are published by Sizzler Editions. Purchase links, as usual, can be found on the podcast website. Find J.J. Rose on Twitter and Tumblr at author J.J. Rose, or on FedLife as J.J. Rose. The reader would like to remain anonymous. And now, the story. Enjoy!
Prologue. For questioning my judgment. Now, May 15th, 2008. It had happened last night, when Sarah and Michael had thought Jamie was out at a party. It was Sarah, restrained on her back on the bed, tormented with silk and satin and a leather flogger until her breasts and shoulders and arms were pink, nipples hard and tight. When Michael had finally thrust into her, she'd screamed nearly loud enough to rattle the windows, begging him for permission to come. Her orgasm had ripped through her body, throat and chest, and cunt spasming, pulsing around his cock. But in the morning, when Sarah had stumbled downstairs, wearing nothing but one of the long white cotton t-shirts Michael so loved to see her in, she'd seen Michael and Jamie sitting at the kitchen table, laughing about something or other, damp with sweat from the Saturday morning jog they'd tried to take together every week. Sarah's face had flushed hotly, and one look at Jamie's expression told her everything she needed to know. Her lover's daughter had heard everything. The only thing Sarah could do after that was take her walk of shame through the kitchen, make a cup of tea, and take a seat at the table, as physically far as possible from the two of them. We talked about this, Sarah. Michael sounded distressingly reasonable, his voice level and even. Jamie had gone to meet some friends for a study group, and the two of them were definitely alone now. I know. Sarah tried to control her tone, but a bit of panic was seeping in, and she couldn't hide it. It's just, she's your daughter, Michael. I don't care that she's 20. It's weird. Weirdness is irrelevant. He put down the story he was reading, but kept the green ballpoint in his hand, flipping it between two fingers back and forth. He preferred to avoid red ink when critiquing his students' work. No need to hand them a sea of blood. When Jamie came to live with us, you said you didn't want to do anything in front of her that might put her off. You don't think it was a good idea? I never said that. Because I know it was a good idea. She very nearly steamrolled over him, blushing as she remembered the last time that had happened. For interrupting you while you were speaking, 100 strokes of the hairbrush on my bare bottom. And hoping he'd let it go this time. She went on. Jamie was 18 when she moved here, and I was only 23. I was just out of college. How would it look if she couldn't even meet my eyes? You made all these arguments already. Michael clicked the pen to close it, then continued flipping it, an idle motion he probably wasn't even aware of making. We discussed it after 6 months, then 12, then 18, and each time you said you weren't comfortable, so I let it go. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. And then, after 2 years with her here, you said you were tired of me restraining myself on your behalf. He put his hand over hers. We discussed it. You should remember you were there. Yeah, I was, but it's very different when it's actually happened. Michael held Sarah's hand for a long moment. Jamie told me she already knew. She what? Sarah felt her eyebrows climb up her forehead. While we were running, he said. She's known for a while, and asked if we always got that loud when she wasn't around. What did you say? Michael's thumb stroked the back of Sarah's hand. She felt herself start to relax, at least a little. I told her that yes, sometimes we get a little loud, and if it bothers her, she can tell me. We'll keep it down if she asks. Was that wise? The instant Sarah said it, she knew it was a mistake. Michael's face went hard, and he took his hand away from hers, I mean, she said, backpedaling as fast as she could. If my parents ever knew that I heard them fucking, I mean having sex. He didn't like it when she cursed, and judging by his face, the punishment for it would pale in comparison to what he had in mind now. They'd be so embarrassed they wouldn't talk to me for weeks. Jamie's an adult. He clicked open the green pen. Sarah thought it was just to have something to do with his hand. I'm not going to delude myself into thinking she's not at least interested in sex. She was adult enough to bring it up. No blushing, no laughing. And I judged that she could handle the discussion. Sarah grabbed her initial response to that, stuck it in the back of her mind, and put it under lock and key. She was good and fucked now. The only option was to see how much she could mitigate it. Her mouth was dry. Her tongue felt too thick. Michael. Jamie's an adult, Michael said again. If I didn't think she could handle it, I wouldn't have even brought it up. Wouldn't have even thought about having all those talks with you. Apparently, she's more mature about it than you are, even though you're 5 years older than she is. Sarah couldn't keep the hurt look from flickering across her face. She swallowed. I'm sorry, Michael. I should have thought it through. Yes, you should have. He switched the pen to his left hand, used his right to cup her cheek. She leaned into his touch. Go get your book. Oh, God. Michael's office wasn't a big room. Actually, it was small as offices went, and especially so given the size of the rooms and the rest of the house. It was also narrow, made more claustrophobic than Sarah really felt comfortable with, owing to the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lining 3 of the 4 walls. It was one bookshelf in particular she was looking for, though. It was behind Michael's desk, right at eye level, hers, not his, and held nothing but 2 plain bronze bookends. Nice enough to match the decor, but nothing special. And between them, a series of composition books. Each one had a label on the spine, ordered by date. April 28, 2003 to May 28, 2003. June 3, 2003 to September 7, 2003. September 9, 2003 to November 15, 2003, and so on. The last one, a couple dozen books over, was only labeled with Sarah's 26th birthday, March 23, 2008. It was about 2/3 used. Sarah took it out, gathered up the pens, one black, one red, and trudged back to the kitchen. She put all 3 items on the table next to him. Clear the table, please. Yes, sir. When he had the book in front of him, it was time to start behaving. He had a story in his hand and was writing a note in the margin. Sarah, moving woodenly, removed the breakfast dishes and put them in the sink, then ran water over them so the remains of pancakes and syrup. Jamie made amazing pancakes, wouldn't set. Thank you. Yes, sir. Michael stood, pushed his chair over. Bring the step stool, please. Yes, sir. Sarah took it out of the pantry and carried it to the table, then set it where Michael's chair had been. He didn't make her kneel, but she certainly felt like kneeling at his feet. Since he hadn't told her to do it, she simply stood beside him, watching him flip open the composition book, click open the black pen, and write something at the top of the next blank page. He set it down on the table when he was done. I'll be back in a moment. Yes, sir. Michael left the room. Sarah picked up the book. May 15th, 2008. For questioning my judgment. 12 strokes of the cane on your bare bottom. Sarah stared at the book for several seconds, vision tunneling down until all she could see was what he'd written there in his tall, narrow script. 12 strokes of the cane. She took a deep breath. Then another. Michael was her master. If she disobeyed him, it was his job to bring her in line. 12 strokes. She picked up the red pen. Of the cane. By the time she heard Michael coming down the stairs, Sarah's heavy, block-printed letters, her cursive was so poor that even she couldn't read it, had joined Michael's. For questioning your judgment, 12 strokes of the cane on my bare bottom. Sarah successfully suppressed a whimper when she saw Michael's hand close around the handle of the cane tucked under his arm, but she couldn't hold back when he whipped it through the air a couple of times. Soon he would be whipping it against her bare ass. At least he'd let her use the step stool. The table had a sharpish edge that was no fun when it dug into her stomach or her thighs. Michael walked around the table and picked up the composition book. For questioning my judgment, he said almost without inflection, 12 strokes of the cane on your bare bottom, Sarah. She didn't sniff. She wasn't crying, not yet. She'd been caned before, and it wasn't worth wasting the tears. For now, they were a cold ball in the pit of her stomach, and a smaller one at the base of her throat, waiting for Michael to force them out of her. She took a deep breath, tried again, nerves tingling. To be this ritualistic meant that the offense, and therefore the punishment, was very, very serious. For questioning your judgment, 12 strokes of the cane on my bare bottom, sir. Michael put the book back onto the table, almost exactly where it had been before. Oh, how she hated the table. Impromptu punishments hurt just as much from where it dug into her, and she couldn't reach the far end to hold on. She had to plant her hands on the smooth, cool surface and hope she could keep from moving them. The last time that had happened, she'd written, "For attempting to avoid a punishment by covering myself, 5 strokes of the leather strap on the palm of each hand," in the book. She did not want to experience that again. As he came around the table, Sarah bent over it, lifting the tail of her cotton shirt and exposing herself to her master. He stretched out his arm until the cane was touching the undercurve of her ass, and then shifted until he was in the right position. "Is there anything you'd like to say before we start, Sarah?" Sarah bit her lower lip so hard it hurt. This was the moment, her only chance to stop it before it began. If she didn't think it was fair, she could say the safe word and they would stop, would discuss it, or so Michael had promised. Sarah had never felt the need to dispute a punishment, and she wouldn't be disputing this one. She picked up the red pen, clicked it open, and scrawled her signature across the page. Michael tapped the cane gently against Sarah's ass. She put the pen in the gutter between the pages of the book and pushed the book across the table. She was in position. She was ready. Without any further warning, the first stroke blazed a line of fire across the top of Sarah's ass, perfectly parallel with the floor. She screamed, tears welling in her eyes and trickling down her cheeks to drip onto the table. She pressed her nose into the wood, tried to dig her nails into the finish, but that had never worked before. The first stroke was always the worst. Sarah. He was so very level, so very quiet. Master. He ran his thumb over the mark. She yelped. "I'm waiting." Yes, master. She sniffed, scrubbed her face on the shoulder of the white t-shirt. Thank you, master. He tapped the cane gently just below the first mark, and she winced but forced herself to stay still. She couldn't stop the fresh tears, though, knowing she had 11 more to go. Half over. The table was slick with tears, the shoulders of her shirt wet and clinging from wiping her face. And her ass, oh God, her ass was on fire. 6 parallel lines, each less than an inch apart, forming a block of agony pulsing upward into her stomach. 6. Thank you, master. He tapped the cane to indicate where the next stroke would come. The first stroke was the worst. So was the waiting. So was the last stroke, and everyone in between. Being caned was the worst pain she'd ever felt. Made her cry more than she ever thought she could. Michael saved it for special occasions, those where her behavior had been so out of place that he'd had no choice but to punish her in that way. 1 caning each year, maybe 2, but she'd earned every one of them. Michael drew the cane back. Sarah clenched her teeth. This was her punishment. She'd earned it. She would take it. The cane whipped home. She screamed. Last one, Sarah. Yeah. She broke down into a fresh wave of tears, indulged in it for a good 30 seconds, then caught her breath. Yes, master. Through the whole caning, he had only touched her ass, and only occasionally, just to make sure he hadn't hit her too hard, hadn't broken the skin. Oh God, what she wouldn't give for him to rub her shoulders or put his hand on her back, just for an instant. But it was a punishment, and she didn't deserve the comfort. She had to endure it, and a caning was definitely a trial of endurance. Michael tapped the cane gently against Sarah's bottom. She wasn't a tall woman, and while she generally liked her body, there wasn't a whole lot of it. Her ass, frankly, was smaller than she'd like, especially when it came to punishments. Because now Michael was out of unmarked skin. The cane was tapping her thighs just below where her ass met them. Oh God, the cane whipped back, the cane whipped forward. Michael slowly, gently removed the wet towel from where it had been covering Sarah's ass and thighs. She shivered and sniffed, though after 15 minutes the tears were pretty much gone. The pain, though, was absolutely not. Her entire lower half was so hot it was cold, knees locked, thighs shaking and tingling, the soles of her feet nearly asleep from staying in this position so long. Michael stroked each cane mark with his lips. She felt herself grow wet in seconds, despite how badly it hurt as he drew his mouth over the burning lines. After each welt had been kissed, he sat in one of the kitchen chairs and held out his hand. "Come here." After as many punishments as she'd received from Michael, Sarah knew how to be near him comfortably after them. She straddled his thigh, arms around his shoulders. He pulled her close, rubbed her back, held the t-shirt up over her waist so it wouldn't touch her ass. The muscle of his leg nestled against her cunt, and she felt her wetness seep into the cotton of his pants. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said into his neck. He smelled like sweat, like soap, like her master. "She's your daughter. I'm not her mother." "No, you're not." He kissed her hair. "If you were, you wouldn't be here for starters." Sarah chuckled. "I love you, Michael." She kissed his neck. "Master, I love you." "I love you, Sarah." Her head was light, full of cotton balls. She dug short, well-kept nails into the back of his neck. "Master?" His fingers rubbed over the black and silver choker around her neck, the one she wore every day except on special occasions. "Sarah?" She kissed his neck again, then his shoulder. "Please make love to me." Michael lifted her face, kissed the tear tracks, kissed the puffiness under her eyes and the tip of her red nose, then took her lips, swollen from crying, and kissed them too. She heard him messing with his pants, then yelped, half in joy, half in pain, when he turned her around and took her hips in his hands. Bent back over the table, the pain of her ass slapping his stomach and thighs was overwhelmed in an instant by the joy of her master's cock and her cunt, and she nearly forgot to ask permission to come for him. But she remembered. The last thing she needed was another entry in her book.
And there you have it. I love feedback, so if you like this, check the podcast page at nobilis.libsyn.com for all the places you can get in touch with me. I'm going to take an opportunity now to let you know about some changes that are coming. Up until recently, pretty much all the content that you can get through the podcast feed, through the RSS feed, has also been available on the podcast app, which is available for Android through the Amazon store and on iTunes. But I've been looking at the checks coming in for people buying the app, and I'd really like to give you guys something special. So in the upcoming weeks and months, there are going to be some episodes that are only going to be available to the people who've bought the app. I don't think those of you who are on the RSS feed or listening on the website or anything like that are going to see much of a change. This is going to be additional extra content. And given that the app is only $1.99, I don't think it's much to ask for people to pick that up if you want to get access to that content. For those of you who have the app, nothing needs to change because it'll just show up in the screen as it always does. And all these will come up on Sundays, so you know that Sundays are the day to check to see if there's anything new. And we'll see what happens. And if that works out well, then maybe that's how I'll do premium content. If that doesn't, then maybe I'll do something else. We'll see what happens. The next thing I have planned for that is going to be another episode of the Monster Whisperer story, which you heard a few episodes back. The first one, I'm in the process of putting a sequel together, and that's likely to be premium content. Now, it's not going to go up right away, but if you want to be sure that you've got access to that, now's a great time to go and pick it up. That's the news. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is Pulse Theme by Claude Young. Incidental music is from Digital Juice. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.